I'd like to begin with Chad, and I'll just ask a simple question. We know what the social media has done in terms of connecting people. We know that information technology generally is reaching down deeper and deeper into the ranks of would-be givers in crisis situations. For example, when the tsunami hit South Asia in 2004, and the American people gave $1 billion, the average contribution was $256, but the median contribution was about $54, because half the people, even in 2004, gave their money over the internet. Then we come to Haiti, where the American people gave $1 billion, and the average contribution was quite high again, but the median contribution was even lower, because for the first time, you could get out your cell phone, text Haiti, and then a particular number. If you wanted to give it to the Clinton Bush Haiti Fund, the Red Cross, or whatever, you could automatically transfer $10, or in Canada, $5. That's the good news. Here's what I want to ask. How can we, if at all, make more compelling use of social media to bring like-minded people together, like around these 4 projects I just mentioned, where none of them need anybody to give a lot of money if they had a lot of people who'd give a little money. We could send, we sent, when I was president, we got $300 million to offer children in poor countries a nutritious meal every day if they came to school to get the meal, and school enrollments went up by 6 million. So that's $50 a student to get people in a situation that will add 10% a year to their earning capacity for life for every year they do. How can we do a better job of that?
Well, it's a simple question, but unfortunately I don't know if there's a simple answer. There's more technology available to each and every one of us than there have ever been, and it's more affordable than ever to potentially build a solution. I think that some of the things that need to happen are people need to start leveraging this technology and start building the solutions. And not everyone is going to build something that's going to solve all of the world's problems, but we can do it one problem at a time. I think that using YouTube for video, using Twitter and Facebook to connect people socially, to spread your messages more easily, and simply having technology that allows us to combine all these things more effectively through apps on the iPhone or on Android phones to build a compelling experience that's easily shared with one another through these devices that each and every one of us is carrying. So in my mind, we just need people to try. We, I guess, in the past have had the excuses that the technology has been out of our reach, that it's either too expensive or too complicated to create something. But I just feel like we're not in that situation anymore. I think we really need to put ourselves out there, even if we end up being wrong, at least just taking that chance. I think in anything in life, even with my experiences at YouTube, that's has enabled me to just put me in the position to succeed just by simply trying.
One of my goals in doing everything I do now, but especially this CGIU, is to try to create the largest number possible of young people who are systematic social entrepreneurs, systematic givers, in the hope that they will infect others and do this for life. But none of this is really going to be sustainable unless we figure out funding streams that can take the best ideas to scale by mobilizing large numbers of people who have a little bit of money. I can't tell you how many great ideas we've had the last 4 years we've done this, or 3 years, this is our 4th meeting, that I knew good and well would never be taken to scale. And I would just invite all of you who are doing this, remember what Chad said, and if you have any ideas about how we can do a better job than we have done so far in giving very specific information and user-friendly options for people who wanted to give $5 or $10 to something on a wide scale. I'd like to know it. But right now, we do it when we're moved by an emergency. But in normal times, most of these public purpose, private entrepreneurial things are funded by a few big contributions that provide a lion's share of the money. We've got to create a global network of givers who are also part of the conversation so they know what's going on. Shirley, what is the impact on America's innovation future of the relatively insufficient number of scientists and technologists and mathematicians we're getting through our universities, combined with the immigration policy that exists now, combined with the current financial crisis? And what can we do to take that issue out of the current partisan political debate and make it a future issue that all Americans should be interested in? What's your take on this? And since you're a university leader, how did we drop from first to 12th in the world as a percentage of young adults with four-year degrees in this last decade? What's your take on that?
Well, I think one has to take a bit of context. If you look at the overall growth in U.S. GDP, particularly since World War II, even over the last 50 years, the general numbers suggest that 50% of the growth of the GDP has come from scientific discovery and technological innovation, which really means that about 5% of the population has been responsible for that, because that's roughly what we're talking about. Now, we've had the benefit of being an attractor, a net attractor of exquisite talent from abroad that has really augmented our nascent capabilities. But while all of that has gone on, there's been a drop-off in the interest and persistence of young Americans in these fields. And so I've called that the quiet crisis, as you know, and it is quiet because it creeps up on us over time. It's a crisis because by the time we recognize it, it takes decades to create a high-functioning engineer like my friend here. So the implications are strong. It's as if we are falling away from the belief and understanding of how important having that kind of talent attracted here and that kind of talent developed here. But then if you ask, why have we had this overall drop-off in persistence and graduation, I think we have to look more deeply into our educational system, particularly K-12. As well, you know, as various groups have grown as a percentage of the population, they've not been sufficiently engaged and prepared to move into and through the university.
Do you think there are fewer people going into this because in the last 30 years we have disproportionately shifted income into finance and upper management as opposed to science and technology and teaching and 1,000 other things?
Well, certainly finance attracts many, many people because, or has, until more recent times, still does really, because of the extraordinary wealth that people are able to generate. But I think, in fact, we have to do a better job of telling a broader story. Because if you look at Chad, if you look at Qualcomm, you're talking about people whose work is rooted in science and technology. And they create great wealth, not only for themselves, but for other people and transform whole communities. And so I think it's a misnomer for people to think that the wealth only resides in one sector. But because we've not really made that totally clear, and we've only talked about jobs in science and technology, as opposed to wealth creation and economic development, I think we missed the boat.
Well, first of all, I completely agree with it. If you just take these two examples you mentioned, in the 8 years when I was president, I always tell people I got really lucky because information technology broke out of its basically discrete sectors, Route 128 in Massachusetts and Silicon Valley and the video game companies in Texas and the exchange companies up in the DC area, and it exploded into everything. So in my 8 years, direct IT jobs were only 8% of employment, but they were nearly 30% of job growth and 35% of wage growth. And that's why the last 4 years I served were the only 4-year period since 1981 when the bottom 20%'s income in percentage terms rose as much as the top 20%, even though there were still inordinate gains for people at the top, the very top. But it was because it was a job generator for others. It had a multiplier effect, and they did create wealth, and they used the finance system to do it, and that's the best and highest use of the finance system. But you can't let the tail wag the dog here, and we need, somehow I think part of the problem for our not being able to have a source of new employment every 5 to 8 years, which you must have in a big open economy, is that we haven't kept our science and technology base up. Should we, we got a little tight after 9/11 on our immigration policies, and we're a little sloppy on how we use the so-called H-1B visas. Is there a transitional fix we should adopt while we're trying to get all the young people interested in these subjects again?
Well, certainly. I think that if you ask any university president, essentially universally, we would tell you, unless there's a reason to think otherwise, staple the green card to the PhD, and let's keep the people here. And
I think we ought to pass the DREAM Act.
beg it?
You favor the DREAM Act?
I do.
Me too. I just thought we'd plug that. Okay. I don't think our position is going to prevail anytime soon, but I favor it. Now, Greg, in my dream scenario for the United States economy when I left office, I wanted the last 8 years, now the 10 years, to be devoted to Chancellor Fox's specialty. It's changing the way we produce and consume energy. And then I believe that the coming decade would be driven as an economic engine largely by breaking barriers and biotechnology. Number one, is that realistic? Do you expect there to be a lot of commercial applications coming out of the genome and other scientific advances? And if so, is the United States in a position to take full advantage of it? And if not, what should we do about it?
I think you championed this biotech revolution by championing the Human Genome Project, the original sequencing of the first human, about 10 years ago, actually, just this year. And a lot of people say, what have we gotten for it? The reality is the science has moved 4 times faster than Moore's Law in the last decade. And actually now, this year, going forward, we're at...
Tell them what Moore's Law is.
Moore's Law is, Paul Jacobs could tell it even better than I, but basically it's the doubling of the processing power of a semiconductor every 2 years. And DNA sequence, is that about right? Close enough? Well, we went 4 times faster than it, whatever it was, okay? And so the cost when you were the president to do that first genome was about $3 billion. Now you can do it for about $3,000. And with the latest technologies coming out, it's going to go even below $1,000. When that starts happening, and it is, now you can start unleashing this incredible life sciences revolution into healthcare, solving cancer, which is a disease of the DNA, to synthetic genomics, reprogramming algae to make fuel, to agricultural and feeding people the 3 billion coming on the planet over the next couple decades. And so I think if the 20th century was about the physical sciences and the amazing things that a Qualcomm has done, the 21st century is going to be about life sciences and maybe even bringing them together. Now, the last part of your question was, what about the United States? Virtually all of this innovation has been done here. It is ours to lose, and we've got to solve the problems you were just chatting with Shirley about. Because if we don't, this incredible revolution that will change the world for the good, change the standard of living in this country for the better, is not going to necessarily be celebrated here. And I think it would be a shame.
Let me ask you one specific question about the intersection of scientific advances and commercialization. I have had, and I don't necessarily have a view on this, I'm honestly asking a question, but it will affect all these young people that we hope will go into science and do this kind of stuff, or take the benefits of scientific advances and try to spread them, like those students from Rice are doing with the dosing thing. Has our patent system gotten so fragmented that we are going to, in effect, by allowing people to take out patents on very small parts of the genome discoveries, to both either paralyze the needed development of life-saving medicines or make them prohibitively expensive for people? I'll just give you an example. My mother died of complications from breast cancer. Nearly any living American of a certain age has had someone in his or her family die of breast cancer. So I was ecstatic that the first real variants in the genomic pattern that seemed to leap out at the researchers seemed to indicate a high probability of the development of breast cancer in a woman. So that, last year the doctors recommended that most women didn't need annual mammographies until age 50, and then a lot of people were scared to death. But if you had that information, they would tell you if you should start at 25, and then everybody else could start at 50.
That's right.
So do we need to fix this patent system? Because now everybody says that the people who have this patent are going to be able to charge so much for whatever comes out of it that it'll take us decades, and God knows how many people will die before we fix it. On the other hand, if somebody makes an intellectually coherent discovery, they ought to be able to protect the fruits of their labor. So what's the answer?
That's a good question. Actually, our company is one of the largest owners of gene patents in the world. And the reality is we don't make a dollar off of it because of the very thing you're getting at. It's just crazy that we should be able to patent genes. And the reality is I think our judicial system is coming around to the right decision to where you can't just patent an observation in nature. And I think more now than ever, if we're going to read genomes of humans, of plants, and all sorts of species, you can't be blocked by watching what you see when you read that genome. It will stop and retard all the great work that should come from now. And so our view is actually the judicial system, which has now ruled that you can't patent genes going forward, is the right decision. And we hope when it gets to the Supreme Court, it stands. And so that science can be unleashed and this future can be really taking place.
Yeah, Shirley, go ahead. What are you going to say?
Actually, he's hitting on a very important point that actually is relevant to our discussion. And that is, now I'm a physicist, so my life and my early career was all about discovery and uncovering new knowledge. But discovery alone and even invention alone does not innovation make. And it is innovation where the value add comes in. And that's what people should be rewarded for.
And let me just get down to what they're both saying is, if you allow patents to be basically the whole process to be balkanized, then you will create what economists are now calling the tragedy of the anti-commons. all of us who took economics know that the tragedy of the commons is if something belongs to everybody, it belongs to nobody, so nobody will go cut the grass on a town square. That's the tragedy of the commons. There's also a tragedy of the anti-commons. If we all own a piece of the town square and it's 6 inches square, it's going to be hard as heck to find anybody who can practically maintain our piece of it. And so this is what we're talking about. The patent system in America got haywire and we're trying to get it back. But a lot of you will want to be involved in this kind of innovation because it may enable you to live to be 120 or 130, but it won't if we screw it up. So that's what we're talking about. Now, I want to give Jessica a chance to talk because she has a whole different story. But if ever there was an innovator, she's it. And she came up with an idea for clean energy that I think it's fair to say hardly anybody else on the planet had ever thought of. So tell us about Uncharted Play. Tell us about sOccket. Tell us how it works so the scientists here can figure out what to do
I guess let me start with sOccket. It's based on high school physics, so I think you should, and I think actually just to preface this, everything that you've said, each time when you're going through everything from the social media and everything, I was sitting here saying, when he talks about young people, he's talking about me. Like, you know, like, and I'm sitting here thinking like, well, we'll handle this. Don't worry, you guys. Like, we hear you, we get it, we'll handle this. Like, the social media thing, when you asked the question, I was thinking, yeah, well, maybe we could do this. I get YouTube, you know, YouTube is how I watch all my television shows. That's us. I'm thinking about learning about physics, and my degree's in psychology and economics, but when we came in developing the sOccket, we all very quickly found Wikipedia to be our best friend. And you know, I may not have a degree in engineering, but I can tell you a lot about it now. And there's something to say, you know, there's something to be said about not being afraid to teach yourself and learn and understand all the tools that these great innovators have given to us and just work from there. Speaking, I guess, specifically about the sOcket, so it's a soccer ball that's also a portable generator. And what it does is it harnesses the power from play, the regular motion from play, and stores it as energy that you can later use and access for other critical power needs that you may have. It was specifically made for the developing world, so for example, 15 minutes of play can power an LED lamp for 3 hours, at least our old version. And now we're actually, you know, continually researching and working on something new. And again, what I know about engineering, it really is worth learning. I'm not going to lie, it's worth learning. But you know, we're working on ways to power water sterilization and purification systems, mini refrigerators. So the idea is that we can empower people with this ball that they can put in their time and their play, enjoy their time. 15 minutes later, they have the power to read at night, to clean their water, to store their food properly, and then we just start to kind of permeate into their lives. So that's generally what the idea of the sOcket is, to not just solve the power problem, but solve it in a fun way. And I think that's part of our generation, that we want to have fun, and solving problems and addressing serious issues, if you do it in a way that's enjoyable, all of a sudden it becomes less of this, you know, constant reminder of what you lack, and more of an kind of a group celebration, a kind of a group community understanding of humanity, and saying, you know what, you know, I may not have reliable access to power, but I sure do love soccer. And playing for 15 minutes is not a problem at all. In fact, when we give the ball often to kids, we say, okay, you only need to play for 15 minutes. 2 hours later, we're like, hey, you can stop playing with the ball now and start reading or doing other things with it. So that's the, you know, it's fun. So, and then there's the whole other idea for us too, was trying to develop something that could really empower people to understand how they can affect their own environments. So going to these areas, let's say a small community in Nigeria where I'm from, and saying, you know, it's not just people coming down to you and telling you how we can fix your area. It's us saying, here's an idea, here's this thing you may have never thought of, this ball that already you love because you're normally used to kicking around plastic bags, and understanding what else it can do. And our favorite thing is when I hand it to a kid and he says, oh wow, this is so cool, and then 5 minutes later he comes back and he's like, I have some ideas that we can make this better, you know? And this is like a 7-year-old kid. He was like, did you think about this? Yeah, I understand if you didn't, don't worry. And all of a sudden, it becomes this inspiration thing where they're sitting there saying, and I was thinking of putting a windmill over there in my backyard, and yada, yada, yada. And these are the kind of things we want to do to inspire these kids to also look into life sciences, look into engineering, and figure out how they can fix their own problems. So,
how many are out there? How many balls are in circulation?
Right now, we have just under 1,000 in circulation. We just finished a huge round of testing for the past 2 years. We've tested in South Africa, Nigeria, Liberia, Haiti, and Spain most recently. And now it's this summer. We're actually really excited. We're getting ready to launch a huge distribution, mass scale, getting out tens of thousands across the world.
And how are you? I have 2 questions. How'd you get the money to pay for it? Number 1. And number 2, have you tested it enough to know that people will keep using it when the new wears off?
Yeah. So first for the money, a lot of it initially came from grants. You know, the beauty of innovating in school is that there are a lot of programs that are out there to say, sure, that sounds like a great idea, here's 5,000, here's 10,000. So we built up the money there, and then there were a few angel investors who really believed in us. I will be honest, it's nice to also have parents who believe in you and say, you know what, fine, here you go. Here's your graduation gift. Make something of yourself. I like your idea. So kind of the mix of having friends and family that have been supporting us, angel investors, and grants, we were able to slowly but surely fund the research. In terms of what we've been looking at for our research, yes, we have been looking at the general churn of how people want to use the ball and how they're continuing to use it. And actually, over periods of months and on, it actually very easily becomes part of their daily routine, playing with it a bit because that's what that's what people tend to love to do around the world is play soccer, and then using it in ways that they would normally use, let's say, a kerosene lamp or any other, or diesel generator. So it fits in very well as a healthy alternative, or a more healthy alternative to those lighting power options. We've also been really looking at, though, understanding that very critical balance between keeping it fun. That's actually very key, and for a lot of you out there as social entrepreneurs, thinking of ways to fix problems, the most important thing is to make sure that by fixing one problem, you don't create another. The way to do that is to sit down and look at all the opportunities for the benefits of your product, but then look at the things that may happen if it does actually exist successfully in that environment. So thinking about the infrastructure that may not be built because you have this thing going out there. Or even the idea of perhaps taking something away from these people. Like, we would never want to take away the joy of playing soccer because we've introduced the sOccket. So it's been very kind of key strategic decisions saying, oh, 15 minutes of play equals this, as opposed to 5 hours of play, because you don't want the kids 3 hours later saying, Mommy, please let me stop playing soccer, and they're there trudging away. So it's been really important for us to understand how we place this into their environments, how we limit it so it's not abused, and also making sure people know that we're not saying this is the overall solution to all the power problems around the globe, but that it's really just a way of addressing it and shedding light on it, using a sport that's universal.
You propose to eventually sell these at retail to people? And how long do they last on average?
Do you mean the balls? So in terms of sale, the idea is first to see how we can partner with NGOs and other companies with interests in the areas where they really need this power, and see if we can get them out there in mass distribution, and then eventually allow for some kind of buy one, get one model where we can fund them pretty sustainably. You purchase one here and you can play with it as a novelty toy. Maybe when you go camping, it's pretty useful as well. While I'm from New York, and I think a year and a half ago, there was a big snowstorm, and it was horrible. There was no power for at least 3 days, and my mom was very glad that she had a daughter that created this, because she was she was just kicking around the ball the entire day, just trying to get some light to do what she could do. So you never know when you might need them here too. But those are generally our two models, looking at kind of wholesale distribution and eventually buy one, get one as we continue to research and iterate to get the exact model right. Look. In terms of how long the ball will last, our original version, which was actually built with off-the-shelf parts, it wasn't built at mass scale, so there were many different parts. That lasted up to 6 months usually. What we're working on right now will have a lifespan of about 3 years.
And how much money do you have in it per ball?
Excuse me?
What does it cost to build one ball? What's the unit cost?
The unit cost, what we're aiming for, is under $10. And it's right now we're right on track.
Well, let me just say, I want to point out two things, and I want to ask Shirley a question. We'll come back. Number one, if you look at Haiti, 85% of the people in Haiti had no electricity in their homes before the earthquake. In Monrovia, Liberia, where I do a lot of work and where I worked with Bob Johnson, the founder of BET, to build 2 big hotels, and we're trying to help bring them back. There's still a staggering percentage of people in the capital that don't have their electricity back. So one of the things that we need to think through is, and Haiti is a good example, is what would be the most cost-effective way to bring lighting to people, to bring enough power to look at a television at night, to power a computer at night for a student, to allow a mother to have enough light to do sewing or whatever. And could you do that off-grid so you can reserve the grid for the things you really need heavy capacity and reliability for and make it more efficient by targeting it? This is very important in the Caribbean for all of you that are interested in this, because the Caribbean has the highest electric rates in the world because they have to import 100% of their energy except for the modest amount of oil and gas that Trinidad has. So this is not a flighty thing here. This is not only serious for the young people who can, kick on an LED light and study at night. I think, if you want to really get power to poor people in a hurry, you have to look at the solar villages in India. You have to look at some of the things in the high mountains of Ethiopia. You've got to look at some of the smaller scale wind, some of the off-grid things that are done. So I think it's very exciting, and a lot of you may want to follow up. Now, I'm about to start asking questions from the audience, but I would be remiss, since we have our physicist here, if I did not ask Shirley 2 things. Number one, what conclusions should we draw from what happened in Japan? What's the real danger zone? And what, if anything, does it mean for what we should do going forward with nuclear power?
Well, thank you for the trivial question, Mr. President. I think what happened in Japan, and I'm going to be careful because, as you know, I was the chairman of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. I'm not the chairman today. But as far as one can discern, and most of what I've discerned comes from public records, what's in the public arena. This was a classic example of what I call intersecting vulnerabilities, namely the perfect storm of things happening all at once. The loss of the shutdown of the reactors, the loss of the off-site power, and the backup power being essentially wiped out by the tsunami. Now, one can make various arguments and raise various questions about what could or couldn't have been done or should not have been done. But the truth of the matter is that each industrial facility is designed to withstand some set of phenomena. They call it the design basis catastrophe. So this plant had a series of events that went beyond the design basis of the plant. Now, in terms of being concerned, let me hearken back to 3 Mile Island. With 3 Mile Island, for different reasons, we actually had the core in one of the reactors uncovered. There was actual damage of the core, partial meltdown, etc. But as far as can be discerned, no real public health effects in the short or the long term. Now, the Japanese situation is a little different because of apparent high degrees of contamination locally. But as far as global impact, Chernobyl was much bigger, and for reasons that we could talk about, but I won't spend the time. Our big focus has to be for the Japanese, compassion for them, the need to stabilize those plants, the need to restore infrastructure, and to get people back into their homes. There is a lot of hype and a lot of hysteria about impact here. But the real impact is on the Japanese. It is a serious situation.
Let me ask you this. Well, I want to get to the questions here in the audience, but I do want to ask this. As I understand it, most of the radiation leaks here came because the structure that was holding the spent plutonium fuel rods, which have quite a long half-life, cracked apart under the combined pressure of the quake and the tsunami. I don't think anybody ever thought there'd be a quake measured this intensely. And I guess the question that I would want to know as an American, let me make full disclosure here. When I was governor of Arkansas, we have the longest continuously operating nuclear power plants in America. They're about 150 miles from the biggest earthquake fault in the central part of the country, the New Madrid Fault. We had one minor malfunction and the thing shut down just like it was supposed to. I am not a viscerally anti-nuclear person, but what scared me about Japan and its application to America is with the lack of resolution about what should be done with nuclear waste. As a practical matter, could the Japanese have designed something that would not have cracked if it had been physically present where this was? That's what bothered me, and the only thing that bothered me is about that.
Well, let's talk very quickly. There are two places where you worry about effect. One is the reactor itself, and the other has to do with the spent fuel, meaning the used up rods, but they have very interesting radionuclides of various kinds that can do various things to you. They're stored in pools until they cool down enough, and then they're put in dry casks. So if you want to do a vulnerability analysis, that's where you have to focus, on the reactor itself and on these spent fuel pools. And it seems, but any spent fuel pool, if it loses the water, will uncover that fuel. And when it uncovers it, things start to disintegrate because it's very hot. And so that's the concern. And they have spent fuel pools that have plutonium because they use mixed oxide fuel. Yep. But plutonium is not volatile. That's why I say you need to worry about the Japanese.
I agree with that.
Because it is there. What comes through the air has an 8-day half-life. That's the radioactive iodine.
Okay, let's go to the questions from the audience. The first question was submitted via text for Chad. In your experience, what is the most impactful way in which social media, like YouTube, has already contributed to positive social change?
Well, it's hard to just pick one way. I think YouTube or just social media in general has affected the world for the better. And it's gone far beyond what I could have ever imagined when we started building the site. But if I had to put my finger on a few, I guess first would be politically. Maybe not in the way that it has affected different individuals' careers, but the fact that society as a whole, I think, has a better understanding of the issues and really has a chance to voice their opinion. So that it's starting to create a true two-way dialogue. And it's a direct dialogue. This is kind of an unfiltered conversation that's now taking place that isn't going through traditional media. So I think in a way that's one positive change that we've been able to contribute. The other is just simply the fact that everyone around the world has a chance to share their ideas, their thoughts, their experiences. And I think this, again, kind of gives you an unfiltered view of human life, individuals, that everyone has the same hopes and dreams. That things aren't stereotypes. So in a way, I think it's starting to bring the world closer together, and there's a better understanding because of it.
I should tell you this, we had a talk backstage about this Egyptian Tunisian movement, and we now know that these young people were talking to each other for 2 years, and that they were talking to people in Serbia. But it is, this is the challenge we're facing now all over the Middle East and North Africa. It's easier to bring something down than to build something up. So it's going to be a real challenge, and I challenge all of you to think about this, is if you were in one of those countries trying to affect one of those reform movements, do you think you could organize a political party system, help people set up their political parties, get them to accept and respect their differences and set them off to run and figure out how to build something out of the social media with the same facility with which demonstrators were put in the streets to bring something down? I think that's the real question. Jessica, the second question. How can somebody with a great idea but without the requisite technical or professional expertise turn the idea into action, and how can universities play a role in bringing forth these ideas?
Well, I think the first step is getting yourself, I guess, educated enough to the point where you can speak intelligently about your idea. You know, you can't just come and say I have a great idea and then not understand anything about it, because how do you know you have such a great idea? So the first thing is using all the resources you have at your university. Generally, because of the internet, there are a lot of things you can research very easily, and making sure that you have at least working knowledge of what it is that you're trying to do. Then it's about reaching out to the appropriate professors, the appropriate engineers, appropriate grad students, anyone who's available to you, and saying, this is my idea. Tell me specifically how it can and can't work. Tell me specifically, given your experience, what you know about it. If you do that enough, you'll begin to understand in general what the main ideas within the field are for your idea. But then actually, I would say, don't always assume that not having this expertise or this degree in whatever you're trying to do is a negative. I would actually say, of the 4 girls, all of us who invented the sOccket, none of us are engineers. And I think that was an advantage, because in the beginning when we went to engineers, no offense, but they said that's not possible. And I think what it does, again, and of course later now we're working very closely with engineers once we have a proven concept, but in the beginning it was such a simple idea that because it couldn't power a car or a home, it didn't seem worthwhile. It didn't seem that amazing to people who had been in the industry, have been in the field for decades. And for us, yes, in our lack of experience, we didn't understand everything, but because of that, we also didn't know the no's. We weren't so afraid of the obstacles because we didn't know what they were. So it was that much easier to look beyond them and jump over those hurdles as they came, because we weren't kind of from the beginning afraid of them and staring them in the face. So I think definitely in that way, try to, again, leverage your university's libraries and general expertise, but don't necessarily assume that you have to know everything before you get it started.
That's good advice on any endeavor. That's great advice. Greg, how can colleges and universities do a better job preparing more students to do the kind of thing you do, or to meet to be active and contribute to emerging technologies, and in the process, create more opportunities for people to make a living doing it.
You know, one example comes to mind is what we're doing right now, where we're just launching the world's first desktop genetic sequencer. It's about the size of this table right here. And we're going to put it in the top 50 universities in the United States. And we've already announced our plans to build a bioengineering course around it at the schools. And then on top of that, we did the launch of what we call the Life's Grand Challenges. We've put $7 million out there, and we gave 7 questions that we hope college students can answer for us, that we don't have the answers just yet, but maybe they will as they use these machines in their courses. And we hope to pay out several $1 million over the next 12, 18 months as these people solve these problems for us. And I think it's exciting. It brings real enthusiasm into the science, and I hope it does good as well for what we're paying the money for.
Shirley, I want to ask you, I was just in Manaus, Brazil, on the northern edge of the rainforest for an amazing sustainability conference. You know, Brazil arguably is the second greenest country in the world after Costa Rica in terms of 90% of their electricity is from renewables, 90% of all the new cars run on electric motors or hybrid vehicles. They've reduced rainforest deforestation by 75%. It's an amazing place now. But they are about to become Exhibit A in an emerging debate, which I keep reading more about, which is that basically all of us tree huggers who want to build a sustainable economy, and I spend a lot of time on this, are maybe on a fool's errand because of the growth in population and the finite resources that we have on planet Earth. And I'll just give you an idea. Here is a poser. The Brazilians have 90% of their electricity is generated from renewables. That's just below Costa Rica at 95. Most, about 80 to 85%, is from hydro. Although they are increasingly doing wind, they've done almost nothing in solar. They want to now build 3 more big, including one very big hydro facilities, but they want to build them all in the rainforest. They're trying to cut rainforest deforestation to 80% by 2016, but these dams will clearly lead to some deforestation, and a couple of them are in areas where there are a very large concentration of endangered tribes, native species. So that's not easy, is it? You want to be, is it possible that you could be green and still not sustainable? So that's, you do this. These are the kind of things that people who dealt with nuclear power had to grapple with too. People who dealt with fission over fusion had to grapple with. These are the endless questions, but basically, what's your gut on this? Can we dramatically cut greenhouse gas emissions? Can we avoid the most calamitous consequences of climate change? Can we find a way to raise people's standard of living without burning up the planet?
Well, let me just say we had better. But having said that, I think yes. But it requires an approach that is different than the one that we've been taking. First of all, to really make a difference, one has to realize that there's no one silver bullet. Secondly, that then means there has to be a portfolio of approaches. Third, we don't think enough about something you were alluded to when you were talking to Jessica about the sOccket, which is, are there ways for certain baseline needs to do things that don't require huge production plants, major grids, that can allow people to do and take care of certain basic necessities using more clever, localized innovation, and save the big things for those things that have to be really big. And finally, one has to do a full life cycle analysis for any source of energy, meaning not just costs, but environmental impact. And we have to have a broader definition of what renewable means. It's not just wind, it's not just water, it's not just solar. In one place it might be biomass. Maybe it's someplace else it really is wave motion. But it's localization coupled with frugal innovation, innovation that references where people are. But in the end, we shouldn't kid ourselves that we're going to be able to really affect all of these things always in simple and trivial ways. And that's where we go back to an original point you made, which has to do with the investment in science and technology, in scientists and engineers, in basic research, and in creating an innovation culture and ecosystem. It's not going to work any other way.
Let me, this relates to something, you know, Jessica's idea, that the idea is that, among other things, you kick this ball around, you get enough power to light an LED light, and then you don't have to have a kerosene lamp. Now, one of the most potentially encouraging things that I've seen in all the climate science in the last 120 days slightly modifies the overwhelming consensus that in the best of all worlds, we would lower our aggregate greenhouse gas emissions 80% by 2050 in order to avoid the worst consequences of climate change. Now, sometime in the last couple of weeks, I'm sure you saw this, this study came out which said because CO2 has a long half-life, we were talking about radiation half-life, and the spin-offs of methane have a much shorter one. Methane itself is a few years, but it's much shorter than CO2. And black carbon has an even shorter one. A lot of black carbon comes from heating inside homes with dirty fuel for cooking or light, charcoal, for example. And almost all methane comes from urban landfills and agricultural waste. So the reason I say that is these scientists said if you went really after these two sources of pollution, and I say this because all of you could afford to do something in this area. If you went after these sources of pollution, it might slow the destabilization of the planet down and give us as much as another 20 years to make a real big bite out of carbon. I do not know if this is true or not. All I know is I read the study. But it is, the reason I ask is there are discrete ways, like Jessica's idea, where you really could go after black carbon. Hillary's got this clean stove initiative that the USAID is trying to do, get people just stop burning charcoal. One of the people I support in Haiti takes urban waste and recycles the metal, plastic, and glass and composts the paper and turns it into briquettes and gets people to burn it instead of the charcoal. These are things I think you all should really be thinking about. Because what she really is doing with this soccer ball is A, saying you don't have to be on the grid, but B, you don't have to burn kerosene. God only knows how many people die every year in poor villages in the world because they're still burning kerosene, never mind the global warming impact.
That was actually our direct inspiration for it, and beyond the green aspect of it, looking at the health issues there. And it's not just in the rural areas, it's really, you know, beyond class in these areas when there's an unreliable power, whether it's that kerosene lamp or whether it's the diesel fuel burning, you know, for example, in my example, my aunt's backyard, because NEPA took light again in Nigeria, you're sitting there literally choking, and everyone else who's used to it is just fine, and you're sitting there thinking, I can't believe that this has become the norm. I can't believe that this is accepted. What can we do? What simple things can be done to change this?
Shirley, I want to ask you one thing, and I want to ask Chad a question. You know, I think you're right that there is no one big answer, and we shouldn't shut the door on anything until we've got clear evidence that it's dangerous or won't work or whatever. But the real problem we've got in a lot of these off-grid solutions is that we're organized to finance what is big and centralized and easy, whether it is the most efficient thing or not. For example, if you were the chair of the Arkansas Public Utility Commission and I were still the governor, and you know, it's complicated for me to figure out how to put 100,000 photovoltaic cells all over the state and a few windmills, and then to figure out a way to retrofit every school, every college, university building, every hospital, and let them pay it back just from savings. Whereas if I build a coal-fired power plant, I just go to you and say, give me permission, here's my contractor, you know they're good, they go hire people, and then you let me pay for it over 20 years by sending them a bill. One of the really great problems we've got in creating this entrepreneurial economy, including social entrepreneurism, is that finance favors the simple. And things like your deal's got a lot of moving parts. It's not all that complicated, but what I'm saying is, suppose there were 100 of you with ideas like that. We don't have a system that is as good as what you said. The science is doubling the pace of Moore's Law, and we don't have a financing system that keeps up with it.
I think when I talked about localization, and I was talking about it in the sense of innovating in place that takes account of where people live, what the realities are, frugal innovation, all of that. But you know, we can learn things that way. Remember the Acumen Fund? And then there's another fund, a woman, Jean Novogratz with the Acumen Fund. I think, you know, and innovation itself is to take some of these ideas and ask, can they be applied on more localized levels and scaled, even in this country? Because I think we assume there's only one way we can go about doing these things. Part of our difficulty as well is that we have an embedded, entrenched infrastructure. And so our thinking is strictly linked to that embedded infrastructure. But what I'm finding on our campus with our young people, they're beginning to try to think of ways to break away from that. And we have a campus that is over 100 years old, and we are back innovating to make that campus sustainable.
In general, yeah, that's worth applause. The reason I've tried to beat all this up is that Shirley finally made more explicitly the point that I would like you all to think about. Most of my life is spent in Haiti, Africa, poor countries or poor areas in Latin America and East Asia, where people can't even take what we're taking for granted, the air conditioning, the lights, the microphone, all that. In those places, you have to build systems so that there is a predictable positive consequence for good conduct. And that's what you're doing, really. You're giving people that you're empowering them to be their own entrepreneurs with your bouncing ball. Now, in countries like America, and particularly our country, we got systems. That's how all of us got to be sitting in these chairs tonight. But every country gets long in the tooth, and then people who run the systems become more interested in preserving position than advancing the original purpose and holding on to the present and creating the future. That's what made the social network so exciting, that they broke up that. That's what you all have to think about for America. The idea that a woman who was the chairman of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission and was an expert in nuclear energy would tell her students and everybody here that we shouldn't have a centralized one-size-fits-all resolution to the green energy crisis. We want to preserve the planet. We need the best ideas at the lowest possible cost with the broadest economic impact. That's a good thing. But a lot of people don't think like that way. They get caught up in preserving the way it was done yesterday. So if you see yourself as an entrepreneur in America, you probably need to be reforming a system. If you see yourself as an entrepreneur in a very poor country, you probably need to be building one. Chad, it says we're out of time, but this is the last thing tonight. You guys can wait a while. These people are good. You can hear them. One of the questions that was asked, I think, you know, you have a big impact on young people because everybody knows what you did. And there are a lot of people here, they have ideas, but they don't have a clue what their first step should be. What was the first, second, or third step you took that brought you to your big event? And what advice would you give them? How did they break through?
Well, I was in the same position roughly about 5 or 6 years ago. How do we deal with video? I mean, my background is in design. Luckily, I had a few engineering friends that joined the company. But I think everyone in this room has an idea, big or small. We have them on a daily basis. I think the first step in any idea is simply writing it down so you remember it. The second step is asking the person sitting next to you or your friend what they think of your idea. Sometimes your idea is pretty straightforward, it'll make sense, but half the time they'll think you're crazy. And usually, when they think you're crazy, you're probably onto something. And the next step would be going out on the web and finding those other people with the same crazy ideas and coming together to work on something. I mean, going to Wikipedia, educating yourself, and connecting with other individuals that'll help you bring your idea to life. That's what I would recommend as first steps, getting anything started.
That's good. 2 more and I'll let you go. This is to Jessica and maybe for the rest of you too. When you heard Jessica talking about her idea, or when she hears herself talking about her idea and thinks about what she's done here, it's quite extraordinary, really. You know, kick a ball, turn on a light. But what it means to me is it's an off-grid solution that gives us a way to bring power and improve quality of life and improve the learning capacity and working capacity for poor families without building an expensive grid or loading it up with something that shouldn't be on there. Have you thought of any other kind of device that could solve a social problem like this, or any other kind of toy or sport instrument that could generate power like this? Have you thought beyond your socket to something else?
Oh, definitely, definitely. I would say that before we even really built the socket, we had already thought of the Bocket, the basketball version. We had already thought of, well, tennis balls would be hard. As a tennis player, I was like, I don't know if I want to hit this thing around. That was a little, we're still working it through there. But I think overall for us, we chose the soccer first because it's a universal game. It made sense to use that sport as a conduit that kind of equalizes everyone and gives everyone this common language of shared experiences and enjoyment and fun here. And so then the idea for us, or at least what we feel our niche is to expand into products and services that address real issues like the power problem in certain areas of the world, but address them in a way that adds to the quality of life just by the action of addressing it as well. So for example, there are many ways and many amazing ideas that are out there right now that can be used to, on a small scale address power issues, whether it's a crank, whether it's a bike, etc. But after a while, they're not always fun. And I'm telling you, this is from 4 girls who came up with the idea while they were blasting Britney Spears and decided that the best way to present it to their professor was to blast Britney Spears during their presentation. So we're fun girls. And we decided everyone else should have fun too. And we really do believe this is a core part of our idea, that it's not just about solving the idea, addressing the issue, doing it at a small scale, even expanding your product line. It's about making the entire experience enjoyable. So from the minute you start to address the issue, it begins to improve quality of life at a global scale.
Well, I agree with that. Let me just say one thing. It occurred to me. I just went through this experience of trying to get the World Cup for the United States. I was trying to help, and I found something very interesting, which is that almost every competing country promised to have a community service, public good component to their bid. So maybe one of the things, I mean, you know, they got lots of money, FIFA does, and all these people that are bidding for it, they got a lot of money. You might be able to be at 10 or 20 million of those by the next World Cup if you just got people to integrate it in to the ordinary process of promoting the World Cup around the world. And it's, you know, you could certainly do 2 million at $10 a piece. That's like pocket change for the kind of money they spend on this stuff. So I think you ought to maybe think about that.
Thank you.
Yeah, Shirley?
At the risk of straying into chat space, but being the president of a university, actually I would like to suggest a little bit more deliberateness to the use of social media. Namely, to think about things like really deliberately trying to link up our students with their counterparts in other countries. To think about problems that are relevant to them. To harness then the power of what our students learn in our great universities with the power of what they learn where they are. To create public clouds that can harness and hold information and data. To create wiki spaces, not just for extracting information, but for crowdsourcing. These are the kinds of things that I think universities can create in a deliberate way to provide a platform for a kind of serendipity. And I think these are very important things to do.
I can't let Shirley be up here without asking this, but I also would like for our biotechnologists to respond a little bit. You mentioned that the science has been proceeding at roughly twice the pace of Moore's Law. If Moore's Law is right and the aggregate amount of information that can be put on a digital chip doubles every couple of years, then according to the technology with Ray Kurzweil, sometime around the year 2045, we will have a computer of reasonable size that will have more capacity than all the knowledge in all the brains on the entire planet. It's what he calls the Singularity. And when that happens, he believes all civilization will change, and you know, maybe we'll all only have to work 15 minutes a day, who knows. But we're trending in that direction, so that's one thing. Second thing is, this year a remarkable thing is going to happen in particle physics, her original field, when the Hadron Super Collider is going to be fully operational in Switzerland. And last year, late last year, at the Fermilab in Illinois, which sends atoms and subatomic particles smashing at each other at a much slower pace than the big one in Switzerland does, but pretty fast. And then feeds all this information to zillions of different computers of people who are part of this scientific research. Almost all this is done collaboratively now. There were some pretty interesting developments at the subatomic level which raised questions, at least the way I read the report, about whether we might be learning something from physics about imbalances within atoms that may have explained how we moved from the primordial slime to where we are today, and may offer us a clue, to go back to what you said, of how to unify the disciplines of biology, chemistry, and physics. So either one of you or anybody else, where are we on this? What is the significance of supercolliding? Will particle physics be important to our future? Is there a chance we will learn how life began and evolution proceeded, and that we will, in the lifetime, at least of the young people here, be able to unify the sciences of biology, chemistry, and physics for the first time?
I'll let you start.
No, I'm going to let you start, actually.
You guys want to know that, don't you? It'd be interesting. Go ahead.
I'll let you start, because I know very little about particle physics.
Well, I do think that the superconductor, you know, the Hadron Collider in CERN By the way, I worked at Fermilab as well, and at CERN. But I think there are questions about, you know, how the particles that we think are the fundamental constituents of nature came to be, how some particles came to have mass and others not. And all these things relate to the issue that you raised. And I do believe that the kind of work that is going on at CERN will, in fact, help us to begin to uncover those questions. Interestingly enough, there are also derivative effects having to do with the immense computational capability that's needed to make sense of all of this, as well as the ability to handle massive data sets. And then that has implications for data that relates to what we learn from sequencing DNA and mapping genomes. And so there are always these things. And then finally, CERN itself is an engineering feat. So I think the answer is yes, yes, and yes. We'll understand more about the fundamental constituents of nature that has implications for who we are. There'll be computational spin-offs from that, as well as engineering. Secondly, I do believe that that kind of computational ability, as well as understanding these fundamentals about the constituents of nature, allow us to come closer to a marriage with biology at a fundamental level. And now I'm going to switch over to you, Greg.
You know, I would build on your point about the computational spin-off effects. The amount of data that you can generate when you read a human genome is enormous. 6 billion base pairs, and that's, you know, in just one cell type, and you have multiple cell types through your body. And so the ability to harness all that information, understand that information, then do something with it is going to lead to enormous new thinking, businesses, and strategies around computational methods. And that's where I think the physics and the biology are definitely intersecting, and there will be a lot of ideas that are to be created out there in terms of things that can really make a difference in the world. I also am fascinated, though, just at the pure biology of where you started, in at least the introduction when I walked on, about how fascinating it is that we as Homo sapiens have conserved some of the genes from where we came from. And I think the more we get into this, the more we're going to realize some amazing things about just the genesis of this species, and maybe even where we're going from here. And so it's a fascinating new world that we're entering into, and it'll be great.
The reason that I wanted to do this, even though some of you may not be interested in those relatively arcane subjects, they will shape your lives. And I believe they will empower more people to do what Chad and Jessica did. If you're younger, you've got to identify with them more because they're doing stuff that relates to social reform. But don't you understand, if we actually have the kind of computational capacity to solve any kind of riddle you could throw up there and give you any kind of answer you need, then more young people who have good ideas will be able to figure out quickly what's wrong with them, how to refine them, how to implement them. More people will have the idea about how to build movements through the social media, will be able to figure out how to do that. And I think it's really important. Last thing I want to say about this is, you remember the people that had the dorm room experiment, and they're talking to people all around the world? As a politician, something I was never ashamed of being, the most interesting part of this genome discovery to me is, and I don't think that my Neanderthal roots have changed the calculation, that give or take, you remember the first 5 years after the sequencing, there was this huge argument between Craig Venter and the guys on the other side about whether genomically every single difference you can see in this audience that is not age related, right? Race, gender, eye color, body type, anything, everything you can see is rooted in between either 1/10 of 1% or 1/2 of 1% of your genome. Now, don't you think that's interesting? We spend 99.5% of our lives fixated on the 0.5% of us that's different. And about 0.5% of our lives fixated on the 99% of us think we have in common. That's why I wanted to end all this. If you just think about that, then you think about if you let people bounce a soccer ball so they can read and their kids turn out to be just as smart as yours are, you've thought about the other 99.5%. If you don't want to go into this brave new world alone and you really see the social media as something more than, you know, gossip and trash, it's really something where you can build genuine connections for people who were spatially apart from you, then you're thinking about the 99.5%. And one of the great weaknesses that I see in the pattern of polarized politics in the United States and other places is what a writer from Austin, Texas, named Bill Bishop referred to as the big sort. He said, okay, we're not so racist as we used to be. We're not quite as sexist as we used to be. We're not as homophobic as we used to be. Now we just don't want to be around people who disagree with us. And he describes all these dramatic shifts in social patterns of people organizing living communities. And a guy in someplace in Southern California devised, I couldn't make this up, a gated community with the houses on the left for Republicans and the houses on the right for Democrats. The houses on the right had little tea rooms, like you could get out on your knees and drink tea, and the houses on the left had bigger yards and you know, sidewalks. And I could not make this up. So I ask you to think about this. I don't know if there'll be a computer by 2045 that contains all the knowledge on planet Earth and it will change civilization. But I know one darn thing, there'll still be a hell of a lot of people that have problems and challenges, and their minds are good, their bodies are good, their dreams are real, and they deserve somebody like you trying to empower them. So that's why you ought to try to keep up with these bigger trends in biology and chemistry and physics, and why you ought to try to keep up with the larger trends in computational capacity, and why you should remember the lessons that you got from the youngest members of the panel, from Chad and Jessica, about how they got where they are and where they're going. See you tomorrow morning. Thank you.